This spring, state lawmakers overwhelmingly signed off on legislation hoping to mitigate the risk of tick-borne diseases in the northern part of the state by updating the regional rules for hunting deer, which can serve as transportation vessels for ticks. For more on the pending legislation, we're joined remotely by Brian Bird, Field Operations Coordinator for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, a conservation organization focused on increasing user opportunities on public lands and water. Well, this bill deals with the state's northern zone, a demarcation for hunting purposes that is, I guess, broadly speaking, a line going east to west across the state that starts a little south of the Adirondacks. When we're talking about regulations in this area right now, what sort of hunting opportunities are available for people looking to snag a deer, and how does it compare to other parts of the state?
Well, one thing is really interesting about this area. It obviously includes the Adirondack Mountains, which is the largest state park in the country and has millions of public accessible land and forest for hunting and fishing opportunities. So that's one major thing for this area is the access is just incredible.
And are there already rules in place for this so-called northern zone as it pertains to deer management permits, or would this legislation be offering something new for hunters, for example?
Yes. So the bill is basically set up so that currently the northern region is different in terms of deer management. And specifically, we can kind of interchangeably use doe management. It is legislated by law that the DEC cannot issue DMPs, those are deer management permits, colloquially known as doe permits, in that zone right now. There's a series of wildlife management areas that there is no doe permits allowed.
And I guess for the understanding of people who aren't hunters and aren't thinking about this space, does access to a deer management permit, is that different than, say, other hunting opportunities for deer?
It can get a little complicated, but follow along here. So when you buy a regular hunting license, big game license, it's for an antler deer, so a buck. There are other weapons you can use. So you can use a bow. You can also use a muzzleloading rifle. If you use a bow or muzzleloading rifle, typically you can have a choice of you can either shoot an antler deer, a buck, or you can shoot an antlerless deer or a doe. And so the DMP, that permit, would allow somebody with a base license that just has a buck option will have another tag, another permit, so they can also shoot a doe, so they could shoot two deer.
And is there an expectation that there are people in the northern zone right now, or people who would travel to the northern zone to take advantage of these deer management permits if they were available?
I don't think that there'd be extra people coming just for the deer management permits. I think a fair number of people already travel here from elsewhere in the state or the region. Actually, I do know folks from Vermont that come over and out the Adirondacks. So there's already people traveling here. I think it wouldn't be enough of a draw, in my opinion, to have people suddenly show up because they have a deer management permit, but it may help, those who are already here. But also, this bill wouldn't guarantee that the DC is going to allow doe permits. It just gives the DC the ability to regulate or administer doe permits, DMPs, sorry.
Well, yeah, that's my next question, which is assuming this bill becomes law and the DEC is extended this authority, what does a smart policy as it pertains to issuing deer permits for management look like when we're trying to balance different competing interests, like the availability of deer or the natural food supply, for example?
Right. Yeah, well, they have quite a process. And actually, where I live in New York State, I live in 5T, Zone 5T, which is right at the edge of the blue line, just to the north of me is within the blue line. And the process right now for me to get a DMP for where I live, for the last several years, they require preference points, which means I have to apply for a DMP and usually get denied. But when I get denied, I get a point, a preference point. So the next time I apply, I have a little bit of preference over somebody who's never applied before. And I just received one of those DMPs last year for the first time in 4 years because it took me 3 preference points in order to get that DMP. So the DEC does have the ability and uses it. I can see it right here in 5T where they are going to issue a number of permits based on a variety of factors, population being one of them, but also habitat. Like, is the forest able to sustain the deer that are there? I believe they also use input from the public. So they would take, hunter and I guess non-hunter input on populations. And then they come up with a formula and they figure out how to issue DMPs based on a whole series of criteria. I would suggest, because the areas of the zone 5 that I hunt currently in the northern zone, they would probably follow a very similar path. I can't speak for the DC, but I would assume that they're going to follow a very similar path what they're doing here in 5T and across the state. For instance, I mean, that area of the northern zone where they are legislated not to issue DMPs is the only spot they issued DMPs across the entire state.
Well, before we move on, let me reintroduce you. For listeners just joining us, this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room. I'm David Lombardo, and we're speaking with Brian Bird, Field Operations Coordinator for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. So in addition to this idea of looking to mitigate the spread of tick-borne illnesses, the sponsors of this bill are also hoping that these deer management permits can contribute to properly managing deer herds as well as protecting young tree growth. What do you think about the ability of the state to accomplish all of these goals just with deer management permits? Is it the case that we can do this with deer management permits and the right balance of hunting of does, for example? Or are you skeptical about the idea that we can achieve all of those goals just with deer management permits?
I would say with any type of system like this, there's always going to be speculation. But what this bill especially is going to do is add a tool to their toolbox. Who knows what 10 years from now looks like in deer, management, deer population. So it's a type of thing where they should have as many tools as possible to do what they need to do to manage this. I would say that there is fairly decent data collected on forest management. I know for a few private spots that have the DMAP, it's a different program, but they have foresters looking at forest health as an indicator of how many deer they should be managing. I'd imagine, it's that's the other thing too we need to really keep in mind with this type of stuff is that they're trying to manage across the entire state and they break it down into smaller groups. And I would say that they will be able to with the ability to administer DMPs, it's going to step in the right direction to make sure that to preserve forest health.
So this legislation passed overwhelmingly in both houses, but there were a few no votes. And in the assembly, one lawmaker speaking against the bill said that there have been some bad experiences, at least according to him, with the issuing of some deer management permits, and also argued that there isn't enough scientific data at this point for them to support the legislation. They also raised some concerns about a lack of communication between state environmental officials and sportsmen, at least in their upstate district. What do you think about some of those reservations?
I would push back on the science data aspect of that. I think that considering what they have afforded to them is pretty good. There was far in the past, I believe it was in the 1960s, there was an issue with the issuance of doe permits followed by some severe winters. I would say that the system that they have now, the DC has now, is probably significantly different than that. We have the type of data collection available is far different than what was back then. Not to say that, everyone, this is a completely infallible system, but it's far superior than having it legislatively denied, in my opinion.
So assuming this does become law and the DEC has the authority moving forward to issue deer management permits or doe permits, What sort of outreach would you want to see from state environmental officials to hunters and to communities in this northern zone to make sure that they are cognizant of this changing landscape?
Yeah, it's a good question because, a lot of this stuff too is, if we start looking at numbers on just DMPs in general, in 25, they issued 666,000 doe permits or deer management permits and only filled 82,000. So the thought that, this is going to open up a thing and there's going to be just an overtake of does because there's now management permits, I think is not going to be the case. I would go so far as to say that there's folks who just won't even apply for them. I mean, because you're not going to be issued a doe permit. You're going to have to apply for such a thing.
But do you feel like state environmental officials, if they do go down this road of making deer management permits available, need to do some sort of outreach, let people know about these opportunities and help them understand what's available, how it might be different, and where the changes are happening? Or do you feel like this is something that people who are in this world, who are interested in hunting, are already going to be well versed in this and are following this with bated breath?
I would say that, of the hunters I know, even new hunters, the hunting regulation guide spells out DMPs quite well already. I'm sure there would be announcements that what they are going to open up and do for the northern zone, but I haven't even got my DMP yet, or applied for it yet. But I can go to the reg book; it'll show me which zones are there, and it actually has a breakdown of which ones are the quotas for the ones that do give them out. What's your odds of drawing a DMP? There's areas where they're unlimited, so you're going to be able to get as many DMPs as you want. I think getting the word out, I mean, in order to get your license, you're going to have to, there's going to be a stack of reg books right there, and they'll let you know. I can't speak for everybody, but I know personally I do that because when I pick up my license, I put in for a DMP every single time.
Well, finally, this legislation is effective immediately once it gets signed. What would your expectation be for a timeline of rolling something like this out? Could it happen in the following year after being signed, for example? Or would this type of permitting process require a longer runway just to get everything right?
I would say that, yeah, it's going to, I can't speak for the DC, but my guess is that they're probably already kind of looking at things. Just because there's no DMPs issued in the northern zone, I would say that doesn't mean they're not abreast with what's going on up there. But it would be next year at this very, very earliest, and that would likely depend on how much they've been gathering beforehand. But the system, again, using 5T where I live, that's in place right now, I need a preference point to get a DMP in 5T. The odds of drawing, I would say, in the northern zone that's currently closed will never be high like it is in the southern zone. There's many areas in the southern zone where you're pretty much guaranteed a DMP. I don't think it'll take that long to, the idea of having a trail to get there. I don't think it would take that long. It all depends on how much data they've been collecting until now.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this conversation. We've been speaking with Brian Bird. He's a field operations coordinator for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Brian, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, David.
Thanks for listening to today's edition of the Capitol Press Room. For an insider take on what's happening in state government, check out our Dispatches from Planet Albany show, available wherever you get podcasts or at capitolpressroom.org.
Join us again for Capitol Press Room, a production of WCNY Connected, Syracuse.